So, I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes about how to gain relevance, stature within your hospital and assessing your next role in institutional fit. But I actually think more broadly than just hospital. Think about whatever that next role is that makes the little spittle form in the corner of your mouth that makes you think, oh, man, if I could just fill in the blank, okay? So imagine for a moment that there's a talking head standing in front of the room, kind of like me, and you're sitting, and this talking head is just droning on and on about some issue or problem or initiative or something, and you're sitting in your seat and you're thinking, well, I have an idea, or have they ever thought of, who among you has ever had that moment? Come on, ladies, raise your hands, right? Where you think that whatever's being said, you could probably do a little bit better, or at least you've got a good idea. So I'm putting people into three buckets. There's Dr. Mumbles, who knows the way but stows it away. That's the person who sits at their table or sits at their desk or sits in their chair and feels like they've got a better way, but they're a little bit disaffected and disengaged, and they just have their head down or have their face in their computer, and or they turn to the person next to them and say, well, how come they never did that? Right? You don't want to be that person. Then there's Dr. My Way or the Highway. You don't want to be that person either. That's the person who knows the way and shows the way and tells you about it as ad nauseum. You don't want to be that person. How about being Dr. May I? And that's the person who suggests, volunteers, helps, or says, hey, how about if we put together a team to do X, Y, or Z? So I want to have you think about stature and relevance maybe from 4 vantage points. This is how I sort of broke it up. First is gender, relevant for today. The second is youth, and as I look around the room, also relevant for today. And here's the fountain of youth right here. Let me just tell you right now. Emotional intelligence, picking on the work that Daniel Goleman did. It was published in Harvard Business Review, probably first in about the mid-90s. And then the 4th vantage point is to summon up and harness that inner ER doc in you, that powerful, mighty warrior that is one of your best tools in your toolbox, okay? So first, let's think about gender. I want you to raise your hand, and if you're not comfortable raising your hand, you may simply nod if the following has happened to you. You're in a meeting, and input is sought. There's a question. What do you think about X, Y, or Z? And you raise your hand. Now, there are men and women in the room, and the men start blurting out their ideas, and the women have their hands raised. How many people have found themselves in that situation? I will tell you, I have been a chair for 12 years, and it still happens to this day that I raise my hand, and the dean just takes the first male chair who happens to blurt out the answers. And there are about 4 women chairs at Emory, and we all sit there, and our eyes begin to roll. So it's happened really to most of us. The other thing that happens that I've found is when you finally do get called on and you make a comment, then often a male might chime in, and then somebody else might chime in, and then the other guys say, oh, hey, Paul, that was a really great idea. And you're sitting there going, that's exactly what I said. That's exactly what I said. So we're going to come back and talk about that. All right? So what I want you to do is think about the practice of amplification. Have any of you heard of that tool? Yeah. And what that is, and it's particularly helpful in a room where you are a minority, and you can pick minority in any way in which you choose to think about it, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whatever it may be. And the women chairs and I at Emory have started to do this, and it's actually been subtle and successful. So let's say my colleague Carolyn Meltzer, who's chair of radiology, says something, and then it rolls down the table. I have my hand up still, and before I make the comment that was potentially completely unrelated to Carolyn's, I'll say, you know, I really like Carolyn's point. And I think that what she had to say was really great. And just to add to that, we might want to think about. So now you've amplified your colleague's point, and then you've also tried in a very pithy way to get your own point out, okay? All right. The other thing with respect to gender is we have got to nominate each other for roles, for opportunities, for consideration. So when the call comes out from the dean's office or the call comes out from the healthcare system to think about people to do things, I will always go back to my homeland and think about, is there a great woman, is there a great underrepresented minority who I can nominate for this role, and why? Use the power of your voice to try to enhance more of us at the table, right? Or else it becomes the same old, same old. And also with respect to gender, and I don't know why women have a hard time with this, but we do, and I still suffer with it, and that is imposter syndrome. The feeling of, oh, you want little old me to do this? Well, I just, get over it. Get over it. You belong at the table. You have fantastic ideas, and they need to be shared. All right, vantage point number 2, youth and generational differences. Had an interesting thing happen about 4 weeks ago. One of my department chiefs put together a video, and he was doing it as part of a quality thing with a medical student, and they wanted to get it out across Emory University Hospital. And he sent it to me because he was concerned that the opening scene, it was a little, so I watched the video and I thought the whole thing was edgy. I thought the whole thing was, quite frankly, a little bit irreverent. And I called him and I said, Andy, I'm not sure, I said, I've got to get the rest of the senior team to take a look at this. I need some diverse opinions here as to whether or not this is spot on. And so he had to wait 24 to 48 hours, much to his chagrin. But I got the feedback, and I learned that I'm an old person. I learned that some of my other senior leaders said, yeah, it's a little edgy, but guess what? That is social media. That's what's going to pull people in. That's going to keep them engaged, and they're now going to watch the video. So I said, I stand corrected. Just please, though, you're right. The opening scene is really edgy. Take that one out, but the rest of it goes. So, you know, it's a little bit for me, this business around it's like the Wizard of Oz. You know, when I see things like podcasts or social media stuff, for me it's lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. And so I turn to faculty who are not of my generation, who are not baby boomers, and I say, really, you guys got to help me with this. And they are fearless, and it's actually absolutely wonderful. So I sort of liken this to Mother Teresa, which is, you can do what I cannot do, I can do what you cannot do, and together we can do great things. And so that's how I try to sort of slalom the ski poles on generational differences. And I guess I am aging because I never even thought about it. I remember the first time I heard the topic, I thought, that's really stupid. Now it makes complete sense. So, you know, from the perspective of millennials or whatever generation you might put yourself in, you know, thinking about things like telehealth, urgent care, curricular innovation, podcasts, and all other kinds of social media opportunities for teaching, you have so much opportunity to lend your voice to those conversations. And literally, those are the things that give me palpitations. I just flipped the slide forward one, and, you know, she had to come up here and rescue me. So, you know, there we go. All right. The third thing, just briefly, that I want to mention, who has heard about emotional intelligence? Yeah, right? So that was studied by Daniel Goleman, as I mentioned, and it was based on this sort of concept around what is it that makes leaders really exceptional leaders. It's not just experience. It's not just IQ. there's something else there. So he studied several hundred CEOs in the late 80s, early 90s, and basically came up with and coined this term about emotional intelligence. And there are really 5 attributes that help to move somebody, if you want to use sort of a Jim Collins, from good to great. And if there's one thing that maybe you'll take away from this talk, is that you will go and read some of Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence and just try to put that in the construct of how you're moving through your workday life and how you hope and wish to be, the aspirational you as an exceptional leader. So the 5 attributes of emotional intelligence. The first one is actually, they are all so self-evident when you say them, but, think about it. Self-awareness. These are the leaders who really understand what makes them tick. They have a set of personal values. They have a vision that they like to move to. And they have a mission in life. And interestingly, I was just doing a panel with Brian Zink on interim leadership, and he led with the whole concept around personal mission and values. And if you have never taken the time or been self-disciplined to really stop and think about your own mission statement, it's actually a really good exercise. And I would encourage you to bring in your personal life and your professional life, and you can do that in a really, really nice way. 1 or 2 sentences. What makes you tick? And once you do that, that can then serve as a guidepost for you about how you lead. Because if a value for you is really focused around honesty and integrity, you will know in those dark moments when it's just you, and you're sitting in the dark and you're staring up at the ceiling and you're facing an incredibly difficult decision, you will have only yourself to rely on in those moments. Those are the scary moments of leadership, but if you lead with a high degree of integrity and a strong sense of morals, in many respects, you may have to make a hard decision, but it's sort of a no-brainer. The other thing about self-aware leaders is they know where the opportunities lie within the things that they're not so good at, okay? So I'm not very techno-savvy. I really don't like generating spreadsheets. I love to interpret the data. I love to set a team about to collect the data so that we can then amalgamate it and create a bite-sized thing to bring to the CEO. But I am not going to be the one tapping away making the spreadsheet. So know what you're good at and know where your limitations are. You've also, if you want to gain relevance and gain stature, you have to be able to self-regulate. What does that mean? That means you have to try to not have wear your emotions on your sleeve, okay? You can be passionate. You can be an emotional human being, but you can't blow up in meetings and you can't cry, you know? You can cry with a family over the death of a loved one or a terrible outcome, or sitting with your faculty member who's going through a really tough time. But try to self-regulate yourself as best as possible. And sometimes it takes a lot of energy. I don't know about you guys, but I have had to really sit on my hands in a number of meetings and just get kind of zen. I'm learning mindfulness from my 17-year-old. The other thing about emotional intelligence is the ability to motivate others. This is often not really an issue in emergency medicine because we are so comfortable working in teams. You've got to get the environmental services person to clean up that room from that trauma, get all the blood off the floor, and get the bed ready for the next one as you're moving on to motivate your residents and your team to care for the next person, next person, next person, perhaps do a death notification and stop and find that teachable moment, right? So we're pretty good at motivating people to move from good to great. The other thing that we're good at is empathy. And that's really, as a leader, when you're seeking stature, when you want to be relevant, you've got to be able to walk in the shoes of another person. So if there's a committee that you want to be on that's related to emergency department flow, it does not do you a lot of good to bang your head against the wall and use the emergency department as the epicenter of where everything happens. It is. But sometimes we're really the effluent running out the bottom of the colander with respect to flow. It's a hospital problem, so you have to be empathic with the anesthesiologist or the surgeon or the ICU doc or the chief nursing officer or the patient or the family. And we bring that in spades. That's part of our training, okay? The fifth attribute of emotional intelligence is social skill, and I would just simply summarize that as you've never met a stranger. And we also in EM do that very well, right? It's like that old perfume commercial. Here, I'll show my age again. You guys all know this one? You all know this one? You never get a second chance to make a first impression. All right. So, a lot of meetings happen before and after the meeting. So get there early and be prepared to hang out. Walk up to people who you don't know and introduce yourself. Make sure your name badge is in a prominent location so people don't have to go scurrying around and looking all over you. Just, you know, you're supposed to really wear it right up here so that when, or actually here, so that when somebody shakes your hand, they can see your name directly. So make it easy for people. And if you go by a nickname, introduce yourself and give your nickname. And tell them why you're at this meeting and how you'd love to get involved. Okay? So, I think faculty, residents, people involved in emergency medicine are the absolute perfect people to get involved in hospital operations, curriculum development, get in the dean's office, become a dean, become a system leader. Why? All you have to do is hearken back to your training and harness the power of emergency medicine that sits inside each and every one of you. You guys are each powerful, mighty warriors. You come in to work your shifts that way, right? You've carbo-loaded, you got a good night's sleep, you're in your scrubs, you've got your stethoscope around your neck, you're ready to go. You are the captain of the ship. There is absolutely no reason you shouldn't, wouldn't, couldn't bring exactly that same persona to opportunities across the medical school, across the hospitals, across the practice plan, in anything that you want to do. You resuscitate people all the time. You snatch people from the jaws of death. Going to a meeting and speaking up shouldn't be a hard thing for you to do, right? You know how to multitask really well. You know how to triage really well. You can separate the wheat from the chaff. You know what's important and what isn't. And so importantly, and a hallmark of great leaders, you can be decisive with very little information. Man, have I seen some people in other departments be indecisive and indecisive until they have all the information. And then they're still indecisive, that's right. That's called leading with ambiguity. And that is something that coaches will look for, that deans will look for, that system leaders will look for. The ability to lead in a setting of ambiguity is a hallmark of a good leader, and emergency medicine, that is what we're trained to do. Chief complaint, boom, I got this. You know, and we are already, you know, we're calling the ICU from triage, right? This patient's septic, okay, boom, off they go, right? You are also very comfortable working in teams, and you've got all those other social attributes and empathy that we talked about with respect to emotional intelligence and Daniel Goleman. I would close in saying that in addition to the emotional intelligence 5 attributes, think about using your 5 senses when you're thinking about relevance, stature, evaluating another position. Sight. Look for opportunities. Watch good leaders and keep your eyes on the road. That means that when you are in a meeting, when you've been invited to participate, look up and make eye contact. Don't keep your head in your phone. Don't keep your head in your computer. Engage. You're there for a reason. It's purposeful. Look around the room. See what other people are doing. All right? Get a sense of that. Touch. Get your hand in the air and volunteer to help. Volunteer to put a team together. Tap somebody on the shoulder and say, hey, what about me? I would love to do that. That's an interest of mine. And try things that make you stretch and make you wriggle and make you a little bit uncomfortable in your skin. That's how you grow. That's your growth edge. And then smell. Do you have a nose for good ideas? Do you also have a nose for BS? You probably do. Good ER docs do. So use your nose. You'll know, okay? Taste. I took a little liberty with this one. Taste, I would just say your voice. Use it wisely and use it well. Don't overtalk, but do talk. Think of the 1 or 2 comments that you think might be important and be brief. Be succinct. Amplify. Amplify. Be brief and succinct. And then finally, hearing. And this is one that I think we all can be better with, and that's the practice of active listening. Earlids up, mouth closed. Am I really listening to what that person said? Did I really hear them? And sometimes in the early going for me in my career, and even a lot now, if there's a committee chair running something and I'm really trying to practice active listening, I will, towards the end of the meeting, raise my hand and say, so I just want to understand, the purpose of this committee is, and the next steps I think I heard were da-da-da-da-da-da. And what you will find is that most people are sitting in the meeting, oh, thank God somebody asked that question because I didn't know where the heck we were going, okay? So those are the 5 senses. And I will stop there and turn it over to this esteemed panel. All right, go for it, guys.
So, do we have questions, or are we just going to talk? Questions, right?
Somebody asked a question.
There we go.
Y'all can hear me, right? Yeah. My name is Angela Jarman. I'm in the last 2 months of fellowship, almost a real faculty member. I can't wait. My question is, what do you do when you're in a place and it becomes clear that it's not a great institutional fit? You know, what if something happens and you feel like the values of your chair or your leadership are not in line with your values, or a decision is made that you disagree with? Do you have thoughts on navigating that when, you know, obviously as a faculty member, it's not, the answer is not, oh, I'm going to leave right now. You know, just tips on how to navigate when you feel like there's not a great alignment between your values and the institution or the current leadership at your institution.
You know, I think sometimes the understanding the motivation behind actions is really important. You know, I think first of all, make sure you truly understand.
Here's a mic, just turn it up.
Truly understand why that decision was made and understand the factors before it, because that helps you determine whether if it's really kind of a hardwire value issue or if it's a softwire value issue, that there's something else kind of driving that kind of alert that you got on your machine. And I think that's probably the first step. If it's a hardwire issue where it is, this is not based on a rationale that you can understand and it is truly a deviation in values, then I would say I'm not sure that you can navigate that easily and be real happy unless you personally look at all what you value as a female, you know, work life and make a choice.
I would have to agree with that. I think, you know, writing a personal mission statement and understanding what your values are and what your mission is really important when you're starting out your career, to think about what's going to be my guiding principle in my career. It doesn't mean that you won't have many different roles, but having a guiding principle is really helpful to evaluate situations like that. I think it's important to, as Deb said, really understand why people are making certain decisions and asking to be included in understanding that so that you can say, does this fit within my value stream or not? And then, you know, sometimes you have to make decisions to look for other opportunities or think about ways that you can benefit, serve your institution, serve your chair in a way that fits with your values that might be not part of that particular decision, but something else. I think it's tough when you have a conflict in your values. That's a really tough situation, but it also is an opportunity to look for things that do fit within your values. And I think it's really important that people understand that there are always lots of other opportunities out there to look for. And, trying something new doesn't mean that you're absolutely leaving something and closing a door. So stick to your values, but try to serve the institution that you're in within those guideposts that you set for yourself.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think that, as leaders, we don't always ultimately get to make every single decision independently, right? We work within a matrixed organization. I report to the dean reports to, the university president, and everybody's, cross-matrixing with the hospital leadership. And so sometimes there are compromises that people in leadership have to make in order to successfully move the department or make a decision that I'm going to stand down on this issue, and we're going to either pick it up later or other things. And that's just, honestly, that's part of the politics of dancing. If you are in a place where those kinds of decisions are you're constantly being asked to, again, cross your boundaries over your values, you're in the wrong place. It's not the right place for you. And that's perfectly fine to admit that and acknowledge that. And we can talk about that in the third talk about figuring out how to get to the next good place. But, talking to your leader and saying, hey, tell me a little bit about how we got to this place and what we're doing, and help me understand that. And for the most part, I think most leaders are going to be willing to help share that information with you, and just to understand that, again, most of the decisions that you make in leadership, I think people think they see the chair and they see them as this almighty person. Well, let me tell you something. You're not. What you're doing is conjuring up that warrior part of you, and being the lead warrior for your tribe, and trying to make sure that is right. That your your people are represented in the boardroom, and that you're not, always getting the short end of the stick. But sometimes we end up saying, okay, I'm going to stand down on this. We just went through an institutional funds flow. Emergency medicine did not come out on the top of that. But I, kept my powder dry. Why? Because I knew the compensation model was coming around, and that I was going to, by kind of brokering a little bit of some deals in that space, I was actually going to do better for my faculty in another place. And so, you have to trust your leaders to be able to do that. And that's not always something I can come out and say, hey guys, I'm trying to like you got to say, trust me on this, right? But it can be very difficult. But asking for that mentorship is really important.
So each of you are leaders, and you both of your own teams. And I'm in this place where I'm going to be employing a bunch of people to my team. What are some of the age and gender and supervisory considerations as you build your team?
I just want to be clear, as you build your team, meaning as a chair?
No, not as a chair, but as a faculty member who has some significant grant funding to hire 5 or 6 people that want to do administrative staff and research staff and programmatic staff. And what kind of things should you be thinking about when you're trying to put people together?
For your team. First of all, that they do stuff. Right, so
Absolutely. Love it.
Really classic writing a grant, people like to put a lot of people on percents or stuff like this, and they're trying to take the most powerful person in the university or whatever, and I'm always saying, okay, but really who's doing the work, right? Yeah. So you do need those thought people, those really very experienced thought leaders in your grant. You want people to be passionate about it. You want them to have their section. That's really important in what they bring to the table, but really, are they going to do their section? You don't just put people in a team because it's interdisciplinary or that it's gender or other disparity equal or whatever. You can't do that or you won't get your project done, right? You first have to look at what each person can bring to that team and what do they have to offer, and that's how you develop your team. And most people don't necessarily do that. So you could have some people that may have not a lot of experience, but they're passionate. You've seen some work that they've done, and they can contribute to this specific area of that team. And then you might have other people, they say, well, this is the, I'll never forget when I was a young faculty member that at Boston City Hospital, there was this great cardiologist that did a lot of work in atrial fib. And everybody, he wrote all this stuff, but no one would ever send a patient to him, right? So it was like, are you kidding? He doesn't actually see patients. So it's the same kind of thing. You don't want just this person that's out there. You want to know how they're going to really work in your team and get that project done. And everyone has to have very clear objectives. For some reason, I always feel like I'm the only person doing the work, except for some people in here, not when I'm with Dr. Saptar. But she'll know this, like, why is it that no matter what I am on this team, I'm the one who's writing the paper, I'm the one who's doing this and sending it out. So you just, I think women do that in some ways, and I'm passionate about it, but you want to know what person is going to do what. So you're doing that thing, then I'm expecting that you will have that part of the bibliography done or that part of the search done and literature search done, and you'll know exactly what I want, and you're going to put that piece in here. Does that sort of make sense? So that's it. Forget about all the other components that it's supposed to be like, but who's going to actually do your work?
I have a follow-up question. When you have a stack of resumes in front of you, how do you identify the doers?
You can't. You can't. All right? So that is like a really important thing. You have to speak with them. Because a resume doesn't tell you anything. It tells you something. But you could have someone with a very small resume who's very passionate and is just a new and up-and-comer and is going to just spend all their life doing this. Like this is, they're passionate. They have to have shown that they've done something.
Right.
We're not taking things out of the sky. But then you could have another one where this massive CV, but really they haven't done anything. It's always other people that do it. Maybe they did it 20 years ago, but they really haven't done anything. So you can't do it by a stack of resumes. It's a lot of interviewing, talking to them, what do they see their role as in this area. It's not by resumes.
I'd say you need to select people who have strengths in areas that you don't. So, there's a couple of philosophies about, kind of leadership and like, strong lieutenants or weak lieutenants. And so do you want strong lieutenants? And, like Kate was saying, she wants somebody who can put the spreadsheet together. She's going to be very good at the analysis portion. So you need to look for somebody who has skills that are complementary to yours so that collectively you are a whole. And that then, again, is somebody that you're going to, for the most part, enjoy working with. And I don't mean that this has got to be somebody that you want to go out to dinner with every, weekend, or that's going to become your bestie, but it does need to be somebody that you can actually communicate with and they understand what you're saying. That's actually really important because being able to talk to somebody doesn't necessarily mean that they hear you, and you have to kind of assess that and figure out how that works. And it's tough to do in an interview situation, it really is, but look for people whose strengths are complementary.
I agree with everything that you all said. The only other thing that I would add is, you want to also make sure that the needs of that person are going to be met by this position, and that the objectives are, the objectives for the job are also consistent with the objectives of the individual. Because no matter how great somebody is in a position, if it doesn't meet their needs, they're probably not going to stay, and they're not going to be happy. And your role in making your team is also to develop the people in that team. So that's the only other thing I would add.
I would add one other thing is that if you really are looking to develop a very highly functioning team, one of the most critical things is that there's a large amount of trust within that team. And so trying to tease out from people their ability to be transparent and to be a little bit trusting of each other and sharing where they don't have expertise is really important to developing a cohesive team or a team that is productive and holds each other accountable for getting things done. So trying to tease that out a little bit about, asking questions about when you don't know something, how do you work with your colleagues to figure out what the right thing to do is? Or when you're not sure, what's your method for, figuring out a path forward. Questions like that, things that will help you figure out how they're going to work in a trusting way with the whole team so that the sum is better than the parts.
I think we read the same book. Habits of an effective team.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
But that concept of behavioral interviewing
Yeah.
actually is
It's
really,
really
really important. I mean, so look that up, Google it, and they'll pull down a whole ton of questions, but, you know, you can modify those to your needs.
And I think just to reiterate what Sue said, you know, when you're looking to hire people, you know, I recently called up an applicant, a fantastic candidate for a job in my shop, and told them, you know, I think you are great, but I would be concerned about bringing you here because I don't think that we're going to meet your needs. And if there's anything I can do to support you in finding the right place, I would love to do that because I think you're great, but I would not feel right about bringing that person into this role right now because it wouldn't meet their needs at all.
And
So,
we're hiring a lot
really
just because
important.
we keep growing, unfortunately. And one, I'm ready for it to stop. And one of the things we did, because I have most of the leaders in my department when I started were all men, right? So I walked in and there was no females in any leadership position when I took over at UT Southwestern, which, in as far as the Department of Emergency Medicine. And so that's changed a lot. But I have a lot of men on the leadership team. So I said, all right, I need everyone to write down 2 characteristics of what they view as an outstanding faculty member. Single words, 2. And so we went around and everyone put words down, and they were what you'd expect: team-oriented, trustworthy, you know, vulnerable, all these words. And I made, as stupid as it sounds, a Wordle. And I sent it out every time on every invitation to interview. So everyone had some idea of what the characteristics of our team and what we all value. So when people do that interview, they actually take away from not only what the job they're going to do, but that person they're interviewing. So we don't get members of the team that just don't fit kind of the values that we have. And I think it works. It makes a cute Wordle.
And you cannot underestimate the value of people who have fun at work.
Yeah, cannot.
You cannot underestimate that. If people are having fun at work, they come to work.
You had a question, Ellie?
I think you guys covered it, but was, I think, in terms of the different worlds, between the department and then the university. Because, you know, the hospital and the university at some places, like we're at Yale, are very separate worlds. And so sort of how is it different to navigate the world of the university as a woman in academia?
I alluded earlier to the fact that I was an associate dean, or the associate dean for curriculum and educational development, and that had a lot of interface with the university, obviously the medical school, but also the university because of our accreditation and all those other kinds of things. And again, I think to Kate's earlier points about being an emergency physician, using all your senses, being there, being present, being alert, being engaged, being attentive. I mean, I think people recognize that, and, you know, then we'll utilize your skills and resources if you are keen on doing that work. It is different work. Again, it's worth a try if that's something that you want to do. But again, knowing who you are and the kinds of people that you like to work with. I typically look around emergency medicine, and I think we're fast processors, and that we are very capable of making decisions and being very quick and deliberate about that. And so when you're looking on the university side, that may or may not be the case, and you just need to understand that and really kind of interrogate that reality and make a determination as to whether or not it's a good personal fit for you. But that's true of any job, right? And so, you know, when people are interviewing for the job, you know, we always take the perspective, or a job, we always take the perspective that we're hiring them and they'd be lucky to get an offer from us, right? Well, you know, you're sitting on the other side of that chair, and particularly as you move up in leadership, you're making a command level decision as to whether or not you're willing to work with these people. And so there, and that's a really important consideration, and I don't think women often think about it that way. And it's important that you do begin to think about it that way as you're starting to navigate your path through a variety of different career roles. So, I mean, there's a ton, of different options, whether it's the university side or the hospital side, and they have different attributes and they have different skill sets. And so, and they have different, leadership styles. And so you have to interrogate that and make a determination as to whether or not you fit.
Can I just say something? Did everybody notice that Sherry amplified? I don't know if you did it intentionally, I think she did, but she used amplification. So when she answered your question, even though she went in a completely different direction, she said, well, as Kate said, and she listed a couple of things, and it wasn't necessarily germane to the direction she was going in, but that is the tactic of amplification, and it's a very powerful one. So thank you, honey, for amplifying.
Yeah, but I think that's important. I think that amplification doesn't relate to female talking female. You get so much by amplifying your colleagues, right?
Absolutely.
All of us sit in rooms in the boardroom, and we are the minority, by far, right? And so you just want to make sure that you have those personal relationships and with all the men in the room, because they will have your back if they feel you have theirs. And so there is a ton of being successful, whether it's in the hospital or the dean's office, of making friends and amplifying their points of view, because they will do the same.
Well, thank you. I think it helps to really name, and you guys are used to it when you go to chairs meetings and things like that. You're working with so many different phenotypes, and I find working in the academic world in the university, it is challenging to be working with so many different phenotypes as opposed to staying in emergency medicine. It's very safe. I know what it's comfortable, but when you step outside of that, then we're working with anesthesiologists and surgeons and people who never work clinically in their life, and I just find that very challenging. And
Then you go back to Mother Teresa, right?
right, and you guys are used to that though, because that's what you guys do every day. So just naming it helps a lot.
Wow, all the way. She had her hand all the way in the back. Yep.
Okay. Hi, I'm a medical student. I'm an MSA here, along with these lovely people.
All right.
And so you guys have been talking about hiring people and making sure that the people that you hire fit the mission at the institution and stuff like that. But I'm kind of wondering, as someone who aspires to be an emergency medicine resident one day, what kinds of things can I look for to make sure that whatever institution I go to is supporting me? What kind of discernment can I use to determine that such and such program or such and such school is in line with my personal career goals and values and stuff like that?
You would take them first.
Go on.
You go, girl.
No, I'm just going to hand this to you. Well, so we do this talk all the time. But I think that
Basically, though, the most important is that when you go visit them, that you talk to the people there. The residents will tell you, you'll get a sense of it the minute you walk in and what the residents think. And I also think looking at their social media is really a cool thing, because they're really, you get to see what they're doing for fun. I don't necessarily think, and we certainly have had some negative things that are on those crazy blogs, but I think if you look, as everything else, fake news, but if you look on really just their social media platform for their residents that are shared, I think those are really nice things. You get to see things that are done during the day, and you get to see how they feel about each other. You go and work in the emergency department, and you go get to see that. You see how they relate to everybody else, and that's really worth 1,000 words than people telling you something.
I'll amplify both Kate and Gail. So I agree with that. I think, even as a budding resident, you can certainly set your own personal mission and values for yourself. And that can play into what you're looking for in a program. So
you know, when you go and visit the programs, again, it's Gestalt. It's how you feel like whether you fit with the mission and vision for that department, their educational program, the institutions in which you will be working. I think that's an important part. You know, read the website, look at the social media. The only other thing I would say is be cautious when looking at some of the social media, because oftentimes what you hear on a blog, et cetera, is not, I mean, that's the one caution I would say. I would use the websites of the institutions, because sometimes the blogs or the student, what is the one? Yeah, student doctor stuff is really inaccurate, and so be careful with that as well, is the only other thing I would say.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask her one more question, and then I would like the other chairs who are sitting in the audience to also lend some advice as well.
Cosmos Doctor. So it was really valuable from, did I take your question? Okay. It was valuable to hear your stories because it was a common theme that you worked hard, you kept your head down, and things happen out of serendipity while you were doing, you know, leading whatever position you were in. At what point in your career did you start self-promoting as opposed to being noticed?
I'm not sure I ever have.
Well, you have to self-promote. You have to self-promote to be at this level.
Here you go, Kate.
Yeah, I think everyone up here is modest, actually, incredibly modest. And one of the reasons that this group of women is so incredibly successful is because they shine in reflected light. And so I think there is a difference between self-promoting and, you know, using I, and talking about your team, we. And I think that one is potentially more successful when one speaks about, we have done this, or our team has accomplished X, Y, and Z. But let's face it, I mean, if you're going to be stepping into the steamy cauldron of a high-level system role, whether it's chair, something in the hospital, something in the practice plan, you have to have some certain element of self-confidence that you're going to be able to lead a team of people, right? That you'll lead good people to do great things, And so I don't know if that is quite self-promotion or if it's really speaking to some experiences that you can bring to bear that say, you know, we did this. If you want to figure out whether or not you've accomplished some things, don't look at your CV. Do the work of creating for yourself an executive summary and Google it. Google healthcare executive summary and spend some time putting one together. I did that about three months ago, and I'd never done one before, and it was really quite eye-popping. So use that instead, perhaps, as a springboard about the things that you and your group of people have accomplished. That would be my suggestion.
Do you mind if I just maybe reword her question a little bit?
Yeah.
I think her question, and Bob, tell me if I'm wrong, is how do you manage up so you're not under the radar and not noticed is probably what you meant more than truly the self-promoting I. And I do think there's a skill to effectively managing up. I try to set my faculty up by, when they come in with my standing one-on-one meetings, I tell them the first thing I want to see on their agenda is bragging points. Because I do want them to spend that little time saying, I managed this, we got this done, you know. So I think it's more when you're kind of dealing with your supervisor, how do you manage up so you're not doing all this work under, like Sue Stern, when you were talking, I was like, she was probably under the radar doing all this, you know, doing a Herculean work that sometimes people above don't notice.
So I think rather than self-promoting, it's looking for opportunities. So, you know, I was in the associate program director role for a while, and the medical director for our department went on sabbatical. And I went to her and I said, you know what, let me cover for you while you're out on sabbatical, because there were problems that I just needed to address. You know, my career's been all focused on, I gotta fix problems, it's like making me crazy. So, which was part of my consulting background, like figuring out a problem, strategies to improve it. So, you know, she went on sabbatical and I took over as medical director while she was out, and then she came back and it was, tag, you're it, you know, I don't want that back. So it's not really self-promoting as much, but trying to solve problems, trying to look for opportunities and taking advantage of them. And you know, so just another little anecdote that I've been dealing with this past couple of weeks is that we're in budget season right now. And you know, I don't have a background in finance, I don't have an MBA, and when I took the chair job, I said, you know, I don't have a lot of experience with finance and creating budgets and all of that, so I'm going to need some mentorship there. And of course, the mentorship, okay, yeah, haven't gotten a lot. So we're in budget season, and I have literally been on the phone with our finance people, I would say a couple of times a day, saying, this doesn't make sense to me, that doesn't make sense to me, this doesn't make sense to me. And you know, I called them last week, I said, I hope that my department's not driving you crazy with all these questions. And they were like, are you kidding? We are thrilled that you're engaged in this process, because you can't imagine how many departments aren't even interested and don't even want to deal with it and haven't been engaged in it. So that's sort of looking for an opportunity where you can learn something, you can have some visibility, and you can get some responsibility in finance in a broader sense. So always looking for opportunities. It's not self-promoting really as like bragging, even though you've got to take credit for the things that you do. But looking for opportunities where you can really learn more in advance and solve problems will find you great opportunities.
And I think I was really fortunate because I came along watching a lot of these women kind of go up in their careers, knowing them through it. And I think one of the things that has helped them all, from Sue being a legend, when I was a resident in Cincinnati, of always working really hard to, just to kind of following up with Kate and share on the board and everything. So I think one that they all have, the traits, is they really have gotten past the imposter syndrome. So I think that they have an inherent belief that they can do what they need to get done and do it. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that has probably helped most of us get to where we are, is we have somehow overcome that little voice in the back of our heads that says you can't do it. So we're not promoting, but we're just going to end with an I can fix this attitude.
Yeah, I want to just end with one thing before we start, for which is the topic, and that is to really be careful what you wish for. And, just because an opportunity occurs or just because you think this is cool is not something, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? So I think going back to whoever started by saying the mission, you have to have your passion, your mission, and set it up with what you're going to do is really important, because there's a million things to do in emergency medicine. The end game is not us, right? So we're an end game of something, but it's not the end game. And some people think, oh, the chair is the end game. It's not necessarily like that. We clearly need a lot of people in our field to do wonderful things. Those can be advocacy and I'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow, but advocacy and policy making, those are doing that are the people who are creating knowledge. That's really important. We need the people who are presidents of our organizations, and I always say that I'm glad you're doing that, and many of you did, because that's not my thing. So you, in retirement maybe, so those are things, we need those people. They have great skills that are really, really important to move the field forward. We need these researchers who are doing it, and really in my goal, and everybody always says, what are you doing and where are you going, but my whole mission in life is to create the next generation of researchers and scientists, and the best way I can do that is in my role right now. It's not for any other reason, all right? So, but other people may have different reasons why they do things, and you all have great opportunities, but don't just take these roles, because they are really draining roles. So if you don't really want to do them, there's always opportunities to network, and you should take something and do something. But be really careful and choosy about what you are taking, because you don't want to be somebody that's not getting anything done, or being seen as somebody who hasn't really contributed in that area. But don't let it like kind of zap your other energy. So you really need to understand where you are and what, not that you can't change, and you can certainly change mid-career, but you have to always have your eye on that ball. Because if you don't, you'll be diffused into doing a lot of different things that may not be what you want. And the end game is not, I've talked to a lot of people, men, women, whatever, the end game is not necessarily sitting up here, right? There's a lot of end games.